Good morning to our listeners here on Long Island's most listened to radio station, Walk 97.5. My name is Dan Levler, president of New York State's largest independent labor union, Suffolk AME. It's a pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Suffolk Matters, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. Our guest for this half hour on this week or episode is a longtime AME friend, Assemblyman Christine Pellegrino. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So, before becoming elected in a special election last year, you were a public school teacher.
I was.
Please let us know a little bit about that.
So I was a teacher for almost 25 years when I ran in the special election for the 9th Assembly District, which is the South Shore of Long Island. A proud union member. Absolutely. And very active in my local as political action chair and in NYSUT and NYSUT's activities overall, advocating for more funding for public education and being very heavily involved in the last few years as we've seen the shift in our classrooms towards high-stakes testing, things that really propelled me off the sidelines and into the fight for the saving of our public schools. And it was an incredible thing to find out that a seat opened, and what better representative for our district than a union member, a loud voice for public education, a teacher who understood the issues that we were facing, and there isn't any place to represent those issues than the New York State Assembly. So I'm so thankful that those set of circumstances happened and I was able to run for that seat and get a tremendous amount of support from labor and from other aspects of and all sort of walks of life. And I've been able to drive funding home from the assembly to schools and libraries and just be part of an amazing body of individuals who do some incredible work.
That's great. And, so you touched on it a little bit, when you talk about the testing standards and everything else. And, you were heavily involved in that whole opt-out movement.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about how that maybe influenced your decision to run in the first place?
Sure. Well, the opt-out movement is like sort of characterized as one of the first major grassroots efforts towards organizing in the last, let's say decade. And I was in on the very earliest days of that, as a teacher, recognizing the impact of high stakes testing. And we say it's high stakes because the testing that kids have always, had to deal with went off the rails when they were coupled with a teacher's evaluation. And getting the information out to parents about how that was impacting our kids and our communities and our schools was something I felt very strongly about, and I was able to get organized and talk with families and get support from my union on how to do that. And we created a real movement, and we coordinated, moms, soccer moms, as you would sort of call us, parents and teachers and very involved community members getting involved. We had supportive members of administration and other districts, like our amazing superintendent in Patchogue Medford, Michael Hines, was at the forefront of that, and our friend Jeanette Dunerman, who sort of spearheaded the effort to figure out how we could go about resisting high-stakes testing. And we discovered that they discovered that there was a mechanism. We had always known that a child is able to, there's a way to record a child's refusal to take the test. And it was not necessarily put there for parents, but we exercised our right to say, I refuse to have my child participate in this. And it was like a lever that we pulled. And we were able to mobilize over a number of years over 200,000
That's
you know,
tremendous.
families. It
Yeah.
was it represents about 20%
Right.
over the state, and it destabilizes the testing results
Right.
as a matter of data. And we believe that the testing is developmentally inappropriate, puts an overburden on the students and the teachers,
Right.
and
I don't think it takes certain factors into account either. You know?
absolutely
I mean,
not. And an extraordinary amount of time
Sure.
away from the real teaching that
Sure.
teachers want to do, and it changed the climate and the culture of our schools. And I saw it in my lifetime when I started teaching. It was not driven towards a test,
Right.
and that's what we saw as a result of it. And being a mover in that movement,
Right.
I was able to connect with hundreds and hundreds of parents, not just in my district, but across Long Island and across the district, and across New York, and we became a model for the resistance movement that was happening across the country. The Common Core came down; it was adopted. It wasn't even; those standards weren't even completely written,
Right.
and sort of pushed out on us as needed in this country in order to get our schools on track, and created this whole false narrative of how we were failing. And
Yeah. And I think to some extent, whether by design or just as a natural, fallout there, you kind of create a situation where the teacher isn't any longer trying to teach. They're just simply trying to get people to pass a particular type of test.
Correct.
And then you don't necessarily end up with a more educated and productive population.
Absolutely.
You just end up with people that did really well at jumping through the particular hoops they were told to jump through.
If you could even say that they did well, right? So
Right.
one of the
Not
faulty
a fair
things,
standard of evaluation for a teacher.
absolutely, and it's not like what we would consider to be standard practices. 65 is passing, and if you get it, you pass, and if you
Right.
don't, you fail. But there's what's called this cut score. So we look at how the raw data is transformed, and then they sort of play around with, well, where are the regions where we're going to say kids are passing, quote unquote, and
Right.
it's a very
A little arbitrary and capricious.
arbitrary
Yeah.
is the best word for
Right.
it.
And then
None of that happens in advance. It always
Yeah.
happens after the kids take the test. So.
right.
And we just reject the whole, the whole system insofar as that it is unfair, and it puts an unfair burden on the kids and on the teachers, and we want good testing. We
Not
want
everybody
good
has
teaching.
the same home life, environmental
Exactly.
factors. They're not all.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about kids, so
Right.
these are little people developing into
Right.
the adults they're going to be, all at various stages throughout
Right.
their life. All in a room full of people that are at various stages, and
Right.
all trying to deal with social pressures as well.
Definitely,
And,
definitely.
and jostle for what their
Definitely.
position will be in society.
Definitely.
That's really a lot to manage based on
Absolutely.
just testing scores.
It's so true, and to be reduced as a professional
Right.
to a score is unthinkable to
Right.
say that and that was the evaluation part of it, is that your whole year's worth of work that you were putting your heart and soul into is going to be, sort of summarized in a number, and that represents the cumulative numbers of the children sitting in front of you, that just takes away everything that teaching really is, and as teachers, we are in that profession, not because we're going to be wealthy or
Right.
because we're going to reach high accolades. Very often we don't even get thanked. And we're sort of on the front lines for criticism from various aspects of our society. Politicians at some point love to point to us as being the ills.
Yes.
But teachers go into the classroom because they love it, and
Right.
the delivering of information happens in that act of love, and when you are with kids and you're engaged with them in that way, that is the driving force, is to be
I'm fascinated just by the concept, and so maybe I'm focusing on this a little bit more than I
Yeah.
thought I initially would, but
Yeah.
I have to ask, there are areas in the country that experience disasters. Just bad things happen, and now everybody's life is in turmoil.
Right.
What is the metrics with the Common Core system to address something like that? Whereas the existing system always had that level of understanding.
Absolutely.
Something bad happened in an area, special time and attention was spent with the people that needed it. And,
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we saw it after Hurricane Sandy, right? In our schools and in my district, my school, the school that I was teaching in was devastated by Hurricane Sandy, and you can't account for that on a test. And the other thing that makes me think is that,
and then to say that the teachers in that area are performing poorly because everybody was flooded out of their homes.
Exactly, and the stress that creates on them, and the people, that what happens to people when they're under a tremendous amount of stress is that they don't perform well in school academically. But that testing was also used to weaponize schools against, the idea of public education, right? And privatization in many, many aspects of our society. And we've seen this in prisons and schools and lots of services, water districts.
Work,
we have, absolutely. The privatization of the public services never provides the public with the best options. It certainly is not economical. We've seen, in places that I represent, where New York Water Authority, the New York American Water, a privatized water
for profit.
For profit.
Whereas government is not in the business of running,
exactly. And then you can directly compare that to, public water. The costs have dramatically increased. People say, my water bill is up to $450. How is that possible? How can you, especially as a Long Island family, dealing with the heavy burden of home ownership and the tax, levies that we have been sustaining for a long period of time, unfortunately.
Living on top of aquifers with tons and tons of,
Right. Our jobs
That's a hard sell.
It's a very, very difficult place to be. And so privatizing public education is a real issue that we're dealing with. And the high stakes testing is used in so far as labeling schools failing and then trying to turn those schools into charter schools, which are for profit. And we saw that. You mentioned devastation. We saw that happen after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and the effects of privatization is abysmal in terms of the delivering of good quality education and what happens as a result of that. We have a populace that is going to have inferior education, that we enjoy in Long Island the best schools. We compete and compare to the best schools in the country. We have them here on Long Island, and we want those schools to remain well preserved. We want them to be fully funded, and that funding comes from Albany, and so that's where I went.
So. Just speaking a little bit more about, again, we got into some of your involvement in your union and everything else, and you also got involved, I guess, a little bit in lobbying as well. So you got a firsthand look, maybe from the outside, at the political process. Now you're inside.
Yeah.
And you get to see people lobbying to you,
Yep. And your members are active advocates and members of an active labor force, which communicate with us about the things that are necessary to keep our local our unions and our economies, which that's really what we are, right? We are drivers of the middle class, and so advocating for the needs of unions and union members means that we're getting better wages, we're advocating for health care, we're really keeping the things that drive our local economy going.
Right.
And I'm happy to be a part of that on the inside and to fight for those
Yeah.
issues from the other side.
Do you experience it differently now in your role than it looked like when you were just on the lobbying side? I mean, is it what it looked like?
So the interesting thing is that I get to have a seat at the table now.
Right.
And so that voice inside a conversation where I'm actually delivering funding or shaping policy is a really beneficial voice to have. Somebody who can actually say, I was born of this movement and I understand what it's like for working people to live and to work in our communities. So, the difficulty is always in the bureaucracy and things that happen on the other side, try to get legislation passed and whatever. But to be able to take my activist and advocate voice and sit down at the table and interject opinions that are well respected and really, considered is an incredible privilege
and informed.
And
I mean, you
Yes.
you were on the front line.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am definitely somebody that people consult. They ask, you were there. What do you think? Is this really what's happening? Very often elected officials get snapshots
Sure.
of how things are. They come and they walk and they do tours and
People tell the side of the story they want you to hear.
right. So to be able to have long conversations about how things are really going helps to shift minds inside the body as well. So
That's great.
I'm enormously thankful and proud that I'm there as a representative of our collective movement.
Yeah, we're glad you're there too. For lots of reasons. So our members are happy to know that you'll hear our voice and consider what we have to say.
Right.
But
Right.
our members are parents too.
Yes.
And our members deal with the school systems as
Right,
well, and
right.
deal with the same issues.
Yep.
Not just that are faced in your district and our members in your district, but essentially what happens across Long Island. So,
Absolutely. And you have a very diverse membership, and
Sure
to
do.
be able to, for me, I'm expert at education issues, but I may not be an expert at every issue that's happening and that's facing individual components of AME or other unions that are there. So to be able to hear and learn, right? Because I'm a teacher.
Right.
I'm a learner.
Yeah.
That's what I do. That's how I approach things. That is the most rewarding part, is to kind of get into understanding what's really going on, and helps give me a real perspective.
The governor has put forward an initiative on shared services, something that I think you've been a proponent of. Can you tell us how the progress has been?
So I think anytime you have the opportunity to sort of collaborate and to lower costs, because we're all facing the situation where we have to lower the costs, and we do live in an area that's so high taxed. Any opportunity that we have to be efficient
Mm-hmm.
and be creative and to collaborate, move forward, break down our silos, I think are good ways to go about helping our county, our governments, our local governments, our state government, our school districts get what they need for bang for your, say bang for your
Sure,
buck.
sure.
But that's really important, because we want the cost drivers to be the lowest so that our workers could be paid the best that they can be. We want to be able to live here. We want our families to be able to live here. We want our kids to have a future on Long Island.
Yeah. So, and something that we've talked about before, some complexities around the issue, to bring government into the modern day. I think everybody gets that. Everybody
Right.
understands.
Right,
You
right.
may not have to physically go somewhere and talk to somebody who's going to have to walk somewhere else and look something up or speak to somebody else in order to get you an answer.
Yeah.
When all that information could be culled and put online and used
Absolutely.
very simply.
Absolutely.
In Suffolk County, we've been looking at this, from our perspective a little bit, And, you know, then we start getting into some of the complexities. Now, the taxpayer wants to know that their resources are being spent as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely.
And so they say, you know, okay, well, you have a mechanic. They work for Suffolk County. They should be able to fix anything in Suffolk County. And one of the concerns that we have is, you know, okay, so let's say the mechanics, you know, specializes in fixing heavy machinery, and there's a snow removal plow at a school somewhere. That mechanic, first and foremost, has to do their job for Suffolk County. That's their employer, and they have to get through their day.
Right.
Then they have to get over and deal with that plow. So there is that component there. You know, they may not be immediately on beck and call. Say, hey, listen, we need this thing fixed by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
Right.
That may not work out. And then in addition to that, the rules, you know, work rules and expectations and everything else at the school would be very different than, say, a truck garage in Suffolk County.
Right.
And then what happens when, you know, there's some fault with that machinery again in the future? And that the last guy to touch it was the guy from Suffolk County. Now, who holds the liability and everything else?
Right.
And rather than getting into, you know, how you guys have been solving all of that stuff, you know, I have an understanding that that's been all part of the discussion in making this thing work. So, you know, when the public says, hey, you know, shared services make sense and it should just happen like this, there's a lot of consideration.
It's not always that easy.
a lot
And
of
good
things to work
communication
through.
is really key to making sure that, you know, our workers are protected, our jobs are preserved, and that we're getting the best economic value for the taxes that we pay. I think, but everybody being able and willing to sit down and have those conversations is really necessary.
Yeah.
And, you know, progress sometimes is what may seem like slow, but as long as we're going in the right direction and we are having those conversations, I think people are willing to sort of move along on the spectrum, and that is very exciting.
And I do think that there has been a fair amount of progress.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because of conversations like that.
Right.
So, talking about another issue, you're a member of the Environmental Conservation Committee, and you helped pass the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. Can you tell us a little about that?
So the Environmental Conservation Committee is a tremendous body, and being a member of that committee has really been a particular source of pride for me, getting to work with the chair, Steve Engelbright, you know, every day on initiatives that affect our environment. As a representative of the South Shore of Long Island, this is a key issue, you know, a key factor in, you know, particularly the upcoming, you know, elections. And being a part of passing that piece of legislation, which is driving funding home, you know, to help our region, is something that I'm very excited about. Making strides in terms of protecting our water. I'm the newly appointed chair of the Toxic Substances and Hazardous Waste Commission. So I'm deeply committed and thinking very long and hard about how water and how infrastructure that relates to that impacts our economy and the property values that, you know, I'm out there protecting every day, and being able to drive funding home to help with initiatives is a really tremendous, great place to be in the Assembly. I think Long Islanders deserve somebody who's going to champion those initiatives and make sure that the funding gets home.
Absolutely, you know, and then I guess the additional benefit to all of that is, you know, it creates jobs, and it creates jobs locally. So people are earning locally, and they're spending locally, and it is stimulating our economy.
That's what we need
while cleaning up the environment.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
very
and we
positive
have some of the most outdated infrastructure in probably New York. So anything that we can do.
Well, there's also infrastructure that's missing. You know, you talk about sewers. You know, some people are fortunate enough to be in areas with sewers, and other people are not.
Yep. And we're in a place where we can look at technology and how technology is going to help us move into the 21st century in a really efficient way of delivering. So, a clean economy, with the highest, technology in terms of how we deliver those services and the cleanest water we can, something I'm committed to.
That's great. So, taxes on Long Island.
Oh, God.
Who doesn't love this one?
Oh, God.
This
is why I went running for the assembly in the first place.
Well, so I get to see, in my position, I get to see a lot of the backlash from the public who feel, public employees are the reason for the tax burden. Now you're coming from the school system, so you certainly have felt that pain and heard that time and time again.
Absolutely.
And I just love to get your thoughts on, not only what you know and what you've experienced, but also on the state level, what you guys deal with, behind the scenes.
Absolutely. So as I said, I really ran for the New York State Assembly because as a teacher, we were on the front lines as particular targets, as our salaries and our healthcare make up the burden of what Long Islanders feel when they get that property tax bill that everybody is screaming about very, very, understandably. And what we've noticed is over the decades, the last 2 decades, the burden of state aid from Albany has shifted from bearing at the state level. Our school budgets were derived many years ago with about 70 to 80% of state aid funding our schools, and we have seen the shift over time. Less state aid to schools, and as Long Islanders, we don't get our fair share. We are underfunded, chronically underfunded. We're underfunded as municipalities.
Pay more in taxes than we receive.
Yes, absolutely. We send up way more to Albany in state sales tax
and New York is like that for the nation.
Correct.
So
that's correct.
It's a double whammy.
We really are. We're funding. Yeah. We're when people say, do they understand that Long Island is the piggy bank?
Right.
Sometimes not so much.
We're a donor county.
We really are. We really are. Without us, there would be considerable issues with funding at the state level. So just going up to fight for our fair share and to make sure that money comes home to us is something that I'm driven by. And I was really tremendously fighting this particular budget season when you look across school districts and you see what the cuts are to be able to deliver some of the money that comes home in legislative aid over the last 2 sessions, almost $500,000 for school districts. So that has a real impact on either getting services back online to school districts, which means that the property taxes are not as affected by. And we saw that at the county level as well. The budget-to-budget increase this year was 0 at the municipal level. So being able to fight as a majority member for our county and to stand with other majority members and say, it's not just about the big cities. We need money too.
Right.
Where is our money?
And some of the workforce in those big cities live out here.
That's right. That's right. And then they pay the extra commuting cost and whatever.
Of government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just having a voice in that body makes it more likely that money is going to drive home. When the county executive comes and he meets with us and says, here's my legislative agenda. Oh, by the way, where's our money?
Yes.
We go to the speaker and we say, let's go. Get it. We need it. And,
balancing the books here in Suffolk County is just as important as balancing the books up in Albany.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about, the term of unfunded mandates and
Absolutely.
Things like that, these are all things that come into play.
And we're dealing with a tax cap, too.
Sure, and the tax cap. And, so that illustrates the need for us to talk more.
Absolutely.
And I would like to invite you to come back and see us again.
Oh.
But I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning.
You bet. You bet.
And
these are very important conversations to have. I'm thankful to be able to get the message out.
We've inspired some thoughts out in the world. So.
Oh well, absolutely. And please be in touch and send your members my way and your listeners to me for any questions that they might have. I'm happy to interact.
Absolutely, great. Thanks to all our listeners. Thanks to our AME members. And Suffolk County works because we do. We'll see you next week.